Hi everyone, my name is Ashley Evans, and this is my older adult oral video presentation for Human Behavior and the Social Environment 1. I chose to focus this presentation on Erikson's 8th stage of psychosocial development. It's in this stage that he looks at integrity versus despair in individuals in older age. According to our textbook, people in older age reflect on their lives and take inventory of their successes. People who are satisfied with what they have accomplished have a sense of well-being and peace. Those who are not satisfied have a sense of despair, and they mourn for lost opportunities. After my interview, I decided to focus on this stage because it was apparent that my interviewee has experienced the most challenges, accomplishments, and overall change during this particular phase in her life. It was during this point in our interview as well that she had the most emotion and the most stories to tell me about what had gone on and what she's experiencing. Some important experiences in her life during this stage have included the following. She retired from her job after 20 years of working at the state capitol. She moved her husband from their home to a memory care unit right in the middle of his battle with Alzheimer's. Once her husband was settled, she moved out of their home that they had made together with their children after 43 years. She has struggled with health concerns and substance abuse. After her husband passed away, a couple of years later, she returned back to work, working part-time for the state capitol in the springs during the session. The biggest change that she has experienced during this stage have been the changes in her social life and the time she spends with other people. In order to discuss the challenges and accomplishments in my interviewee's life related to this particular stage, I chose to focus on 4 main areas that we touched on during our interview: change, loss, adventures, and avoidance. My interviewee has experienced a number of changes during this particular phase in her life. She's changed homes, she's changed friends, she's changed relationships, and she's changed her day-to-day activities. She's gone from working part-time to not working at all to working again. She's changed the individuals she spends her time with. She's changed the amount of time she spends with her family, and she's changed her outlook on what she wants to do with her life moving forward. Among all of this change, loss was a factor that came up more than once. She's lost her sense of self at times, due to not knowing exactly where she's going or what she wants to do as she moves forward. She's lost friends, family members, and community members to death. Losing her husband was one of the biggest changes that's impacted my interviewee over this time in her life. This stage in life has brought her a lot of loneliness and a lot of despair, and living without her husband has been proving to be very difficult for her. Although it's been almost 5 years, she still talks about him as if he was still here. This loss has been really difficult on not only her but her family as well, and has definitely changed the relationship she has with her children and grandchildren. Some accomplishments that we discussed are more so on the lines of adventure. She identified these adventures as being some of the most exciting times that she can remember over these last few years. The biggest adventure she went on was shortly after moving her husband into the memory care unit. She went to Ireland with her cousins for 3.5 weeks. During her time in Ireland, she spent a lot of time getting to know herself, getting to know her family and her family's history, and really enjoying her time away with people that loved her. She continues to go on little adventures with the people who love her the most. She has a lot of very strong friends that support her, and they go on trips to the mall, trips to movies, and local productions at theater companies. She also spends quite a bit of time supporting her grandchildren during their sporting events, and likes to go on girls' days with her daughter and granddaughter to different activities throughout the area. She says her adventures are what keep her going, and she hopes that she can create more memories with the people she loves. One of the biggest challenges I believe that my interviewee brought up numerous times is the avoidance that she has when it comes to doing activities from time to time. A lot of times her health concerns have made it difficult for her to participate in things like she used to, and so she finds herself avoiding going out and spending time with people just because it's very difficult for her at times. Her substance abuse has taken its toll, and though she doesn't talk about it often, it's very apparent that this is a big burden on her, and she wishes that she could get help, but hasn't found the way to do so yet. It's a very big difficulty for her family as well, because at times she avoids going out with them because she can't due to the substances that she's put into her body. This is something her family and her are working on, and hopefully something that will help her reach a successful end to this stage in her life. The crisis of focus for Erikson's 5th stage of psychosocial development is integrity versus despair. Throughout my interview and while coming together with this presentation, I chose to look at it in the sense of satisfaction versus failure in regards to the events that have occurred in my interviewee's life. One thing that was noted in my research for my annotated bibliography and while talking to my interviewee was there's a continuum between integrity and despair. It doesn't occur one versus the other. It seems to be something that can go back and forth. I have noted that there are many external factors contributing to this change in this continuum of change, and have also noticed that her development early on in her life has definitely had a strong impact on her current emotional and cognitive functioning. It's interesting hearing how events that have happened so long ago can still strongly impact the events and the things that she chooses to do today. When looking at the biopsychosocial factors and events that have facilitated and inhibited the resolution of this crisis, many different things came up in our interview. Health concerns, substance abuse, her changes in work, changes in religion, how she socializes, and her relationships with her family are all things that have both facilitated and inhibited this resolution. As a white woman in a middle-class neighborhood in a rural community in Minnesota, my interviewee is a very typical, very average individual here in this community. I think this has shaped her life because she's very familiar with the people in this town and has a lot of very strong connections that have helped her make her way through the trials and the tribulations that she has experienced. One difficult thing that has occurred in her life, though, is her change with religion. She shared a lot about being younger and how important religion was to her and going to church. She noted that growing up and even as an adult, she was very active and very involved. After her husband died, however, her involvement with religion has changed a lot. She finds herself not going to church often and is not as involved in the church as she used to be. This changed involvement in her church has really cut some ties with the people she used to have supporting her in her lifestyle. As far as oppression goes, I definitely have noticed that being an older woman in a small community can really definitely change how she interacts with the people around her. There are fewer opportunities for her to be involved in, and because this town is growing and has more families, there's less of an older generation available for her to connect with. When looking at this from a different perspective and a multi-systems lens, it's important to look at how the family and her community have impacted these crises and have really both facilitated and inhibited her resolution of getting there. Her relationship with her family has changed drastically over the years. After the passing of her husband, her substance abuse problems became a really big deal, and it was hard for her family to maintain a strong relationship with her while she struggled with this. As she avoided going to family gatherings, sporting events for her grandchildren, and different social gatherings that were happening in the area, it became more difficult for her family to support her and to understand how to build her up and get her through these hard times. The changes in her community have definitely helped and inhibited her. A big change that came to mind during this interview, especially when related to her community, was when she moved from her home to her townhome in a smaller development with people that were more around her age and had similar lifestyles. This has been super helpful for her because it's forced her to become a part of a community where she needs to be involved. In the beginning of this move, she was reluctant to get involved and to step out of her comfort zone, but she's slowly become more involved and has become the secretary to their association and is making a lot of changes in their area to make it more beautiful and more safe for the people that live there. Looking at larger picture things, her involvement Involvement at work over these last few years has been huge in her resolution of this crisis in her life. She's become more involved with her career and with social policy in the area. She's met a lot of people while working at the Capitol and has made a lot of progress helping them develop different roles and different rules that have impacted her life and the lives of others around us. I think this has helped her step out of her comfort zone and has really given her a purpose, especially when it comes to work and when working with the people around her. I hope she continues to do this job, as it seems that it's something she really enjoys, and it gives her a voice in the government where she really needs one at this time. For the second theory in this presentation, I chose to focus on the disengagement theory from Cumming and Henry. I had a hard time finding a theory that I thought was fitting for my interviewee, but this one made a lot of sense to me, and it was something that I saw as a part of her life and something I thought might be interesting to touch on. The disengagement theory states that as individuals age, they begin to disengage from their formal roles and responsibilities. They also state that disengagement is a mutual agreement between aging individuals and their societies. Finally, this theory looks at how interactions between individuals and their society changes as people age. What I found very interesting about this theory was how much of it made sense when I was looking back at my interview with my individual. The biggest thing that I took note of was the disengagement from her formal roles and responsibilities as she aged. It was very apparent that as she aged, her children also aged, and so her formal roles as mother and her responsibilities for her kids changed drastically. The other part that was really interesting to me was the disengagement between her and her society. This disengagement took many different forms, but I think the biggest one was when she decided to retire from work for the first time. This retirement took her from being a working woman to a woman who stayed home and no longer had as many responsibilities as she used to. She was free to do more things on her own, but still found herself not doing as much as she thought she was going to. There was less interaction with her community because she didn't have any reason to go out in the community, and this just seemed to be normal for everyone that was involved in her life at the time. I think looking at the disengagement theory and how it related to my interviewee throughout her life really just solidified the idea that as people age, they really do disengage from their roles and they do disengage from society to a point. Once she went back to work, it was very nice for her to have that engagement and for her to be connected to her society on a more deeper level, and it's something I think she'll continue to do. So while I thought this particular theory was very fitting, it also wasn't fitting at the same time because she still does have some interactions between herself and her society at times. I think it's safe to say that both theories in this case had limitations. Looking at Erikson's theory of psychosocial development, though, there were many limitations that were very fitting for my interviewee in this process. The first thing that came up, and something that I've noted many times, is the fact that integrity and despair can occur on a continuum. This back and forth from one to the other is not something that happens once. It appears that it's something that can happen back and forth and many times over again. I also believe that while you can be satisfied in one area of your life, it's okay to not be satisfied in other areas and still feel that sense of despair at times. I think another major limitation of Erikson's theory is the fact that psychological factors are not taken into account for any of these behavioral changes at this point in their life. I think a lot of factors can play into whether or not individuals successfully get through these crises, but psychological factors are not something that get looked at. Mental health takes a huge toll on my interviewee's life. Her substance abuse really impacts the way that she handles and processes the things that are occurring around her, and this is something that we don't look at enough when deciding whether or not she has successfully completed Erikson's stages. As I've mentioned before, I think it's important to note that my interviewee felt successful and satisfied with certain aspects of her life, but there also is some disappointment in other choices and aspects that occurred. I don't think this is a right or a wrong thing for her to be feeling, but it also isn't taken into account for when we look at Erikson's stage. The final limitation with Erikson's theory that came up many times throughout this process was the fact that his theory doesn't look at other important factors in my interviewee's life. Factors such as religion, work, family connections, or the consequences of grief and loss. Religion played a major factor in my interviewee's life. She felt a very strong connection to her faith, and this connection has changed drastically over the years. I think it's difficult to say whether this has been a positive or a negative aspect in her life because it's been very up and down for her, but it's also something that has helped her feel a sense of success and feel satisfaction at times when she needs it. Not looking at whether or not an individual is working, I think, is a very important part of determining whether or not they've reached that integrity or despair that Erickson is looking at. I think when my individual retired, it was very difficult on her because it provided a really big change in her life. Her decision to go back to work, however, seems a little more positive in her life, but it has also caused some stress for her as well. I think this is where that continuum comes into play, because while it's good in some aspects, it's difficult in others. I think the biggest thing that doesn't get touched on within Erickson's theory are the consequences that come from grief and loss. In older age, I think it can be noted that individuals lose a lot of friends and family members. I think this loss is very difficult, but I think it's handled differently older in life than it is younger. When my interviewee lost her husband, she lost a lot of her focus on life. She lost a lot of the activities and things that she used to do, and it was very difficult for her to move forward. I think this is common in older people when they lose a spouse or a friend, and something that could be focused on more. Overall, though, I think there are a lot of connections that could be made between Erickson's theory and my interviewee. It was interesting to look at how all of those stages can be factored into each part of her life, and I was really happy that I was able to focus on this particular stage and in this particular moment. As I wrap up this presentation, here are the references that I used throughout my PowerPoint. Each of them are noted, and each of them played a huge factor in why I chose to look at this stage in her lifestyle. I really look forward to hearing everyone else's presentations, and I'm very happy to be wrapping this one up. Thank you all.